Jake Morrison had been working salvage jobs for 3 years, and most of them were boring. He'd spend his days driving through empty wastelands, looking for scraps of old metal that companies paid him small money for. His truck was beat up, his apartment was small, and his dreams were getting smaller every day. But that morning something felt different. The Meridian Desert stretched out flat and endless, nothing but sand and rocks and the occasional dead tree. Jake drove his old salvage truck across the dunes, his metal detector beeping softly from the passenger seat. He'd done this route 100 times before. Find some scrap, load it up, drive back to the depot, get paid. That was the job. That was his life. But around noon, his metal detector started going absolutely crazy. The beeping turned into a constant wail and Jake's heart jumped. In salvage work, a signal that strong usually meant one thing. Something big was buried down there. Something really big. He stopped the truck and grabbed his detector, walking out into the blazing heat. The sand was hot under his boots and sweat was already dripping down his face. He swept the detector across the ground, following the sound, moving deeper and deeper into the dunes. And then he saw it. At first, it looked like just another rock sticking out of the sand. But as Jake got closer, he realized it was way too smooth, way too perfect. It was metal. Corroded and covered in rust and dust, but definitely metal. He started digging with his hands, pulling away sand and rocks, and more metal appeared. Then he saw the curves, the shape, the markings. His hands froze. This wasn't just scrap. This was a ship. Not a small ship. A massive one. Jake stepped back and tried to see the whole thing, but most of it was still buried under the sand. He could see part of the hull, several stories tall, with writing on the side that was barely readable through the rust. The letters spelled out, Meridian Star. Jake's mind raced. The Meridian Star. He'd heard about this ship. Everyone had heard about it. It was a deep space exploration vessel that had vanished 40 years ago. It just disappeared one day and nobody ever figured out what happened to it. The government searched for it, scientists looked for it, but nothing. It became a legend, a ghost story, a mystery. And now Jake had found it. He knew he should probably call his company and tell them. That was the professional thing to do. But something inside him said no. This was his ship. His discovery. His chance at something big. Jake climbed up the side of the hull, using the rust and the dents as handholds. The metal was cold despite the hot sun, and it felt solid under his fingers. When he reached the top, he could see more of the ship now, stretching out beneath the sand like the skeleton of some ancient creature. He looked around to see if anyone was watching him. There was nothing but empty desert in every direction. He found the airlock on the side of the ship, a large circular door covered in rust and sand. It had a manual override button next to it, something red and faded. Jake pressed it, not really expecting anything to happen. For a moment, nothing did. Then he heard a sound. A click. A low mechanical sound that hadn't made itself heard in 40 years. The door began to slide open with a grinding, protesting noise. Cold air rushed out, stale and dry, carrying the smell of metal and dust and something else. Something old. Jake waited until the door was fully open, then he grabbed his flashlight and looked inside. The corridor stretched ahead of him, disappearing into darkness. The walls were covered in what looked like frost or maybe some kind of buildup. There were no lights, no sounds, nothing but the darkness and the cold. It was like stepping into a tomb. Jake took a breath and stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind him, and for a moment he stood in complete darkness until his flashlight came on. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing more of the corridor. Equipment mounted on the walls, cables running overhead, and doors on either side leading to other rooms. Everything was quiet. Everything was dead. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Jake knew that this ship wasn't completely dead. He could feel it, like something was just waiting. Waiting for someone to wake it up. He started walking deeper into the ship, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. His company could wait. His regular job could wait. This was his moment. This was his chance to find something real, something important. And he wasn't going to waste it. He had no idea what he was walking into. He had no idea that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. Jake lost track of time somewhere around day 5. He wasn't sure if it was morning or night anymore because there were no windows in the ship, just endless corridors lit by his flashlight. He'd brought supplies, food, water, a sleeping bag, but mostly he forgot to use them. He was too focused on the work. The first thing he did was find the main power distribution center. It was deep in the belly of the ship, surrounded by thick cables and massive panels covered in switches and lights that had been dark for 40 years. The system was corroded, some of the connections had failed completely, and several circuit boards looked like they'd never work again. But Jake had been studying how ships like this worked since he was a kid. He understood the logic behind it, the way everything connected. He started small. He replaced the corroded fuses one by one, testing each connection carefully. Some of the older components he couldn't fix, so he had to get creative. He found spare parts in storage rooms scattered throughout the ship and rewired sections of the system to bypass the damaged sections. It was like solving a puzzle, and with each piece he fixed, more of the ship started responding. A light flickered on here. A ventilation fan began to hum there. It was slow work, but it was working. By day 10, Jake had the basic life support systems running. Air started flowing through the corridors. The temperature stabilized. He could breathe easier knowing that at least the ship wouldn't become a tomb. He moved on to the reactors next, the real power source that had kept the ship running for decades before it shut down. The reactor room was massive, intimidating in a way that made Jake realize just how ambitious this ship's designers had been. 3 massive cylindrical reactors dominated the space, each one as tall as a house and covered in valves and gauges and warning labels. Most of the systems were fried. But one of them, the secondary reactor, still had some juice in it. Jake spent 2 days just cleaning it, removing corrosion, replacing damaged tubes, testing the containment systems. When he finally got it to ignite, it was one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. A low hum filled the ship, and suddenly there was real power flowing through the corridors again. With power restored, Jake started exploring the upper decks. That's when he found the crew quarters. The first thing he noticed was how normal everything looked, like the crew had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. There were personal items everywhere. In one bunk, a framed photo of a young woman with 2 kids was still sitting on the shelf. In another room, children's drawings were magnetized to the wall, stick figures and planets and spaceships drawn in bright crayon colors. Someone had drawn their family and written, "Love you, Mommy," underneath. Jake had to sit down for a moment when he read that. In the captain's quarters, he found something that hit him even harder. A chess set sat on a table, the game frozen mid-play. The pieces were positioned exactly as they'd been left 40 years ago. Someone had been playing white, someone else had been playing black. Jake wondered who won. He wondered if it mattered anymore. These were real people, he thought. Not just names in history books or stories about a vanished ship. They were real people with families, with games they played in their free time, with photos and memories and lives. And something had happened to them. Something bad enough that they never came back. The thought drove Jake to work faster. He repaired the communications array next, bypassing damaged sections and replacing what he could. Then came the environmental systems, the navigation computers, and finally, the main data center. This was where the real information would be stored. This was where the answers would be. It took him 2 full days just to get the main computer system to boot up. The files were corrupted, some of the storage drives had failed, but enough remained intact. When the screen finally flickered to life and cast its blue glow across his face, Jake felt something shift inside him. He was no longer just a salvage worker finding scrap metal. He was uncovering a mystery. His hands moved across the keyboard, navigating through the file system. Ship logs, crew records, scientific data. But the thing that caught his attention was the captain's personal logbook. The most recent entries. Jake's finger hovered over the file, and for just a second he hesitated. He had a feeling that whatever was in there was going to change things. He clicked on it anyway. The first few entries were routine. Captain's notes about crew morale, maintenance schedules, scientific discoveries. Nothing unusual. But as Jake scrolled forward, reading date after date, the tone of the entries started to change. The writing became less formal. More urgent. More scared. His breath caught as he read the final entries, and suddenly he understood that finding this ship wasn't just his lucky break. It was something much more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Jake clicked on the audio file and the speakers crackled to life. For a moment there was nothing but static, and then a woman's voice filled the empty corridor. It was tired, worn down, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Captain Lisa Hartwell. The voice of a woman who had been dead for 40 years. Captain's log, stardate 4027. The recording began, formal and professional. All systems nominal. The crew completed their surveys of Sector 7 today. Dr. Raymond's team discovered some interesting crystalline formations that might indicate past geological activity. Nothing that would warrant further investigation, but interesting nonetheless. Morale is good. We should be back to the colony within 6 months. Jake listened to several more entries like this. They were boring, routine, exactly what you'd expect from a deep space exploration mission. Hartwell talked about the crew, about scientific discoveries, about maintenance schedules and supply inventories. She sounded competent and calm, the kind of captain you'd want leading a mission into space. There was nothing here that explained what happened. But then the tone shifted. "Captain's log, stardate 4089, the voice said, and this time there was something different. A hesitation. "We encountered a derelict probe today at the edge of Sector 9. Unknown origin, heavily damaged, but still broadcasting a signal on an old frequency. Lieutenant Chen wanted to bring it aboard for analysis. I authorized it. We took every precaution, full quarantine, biohazard protocols, the works. Dr. Raymond's team has been examining it in the sealed lab all day. So far they've found nothing unusual. Just old machinery. Dead for a long time." Jake leaned forward. This was where things started to change. "Captain's log, stardate 4093, Hartwell's voice continued, and now there was definitely worry in it. "Something's wrong. I don't know what yet, but something's wrong. Dr. Raymond reported finding something inside the probe. Some kind of compartment hidden behind the main panel. It contained, he's not sure what to call it. He said it looked biological but nothing like any life form we've ever documented. It was small, maybe 6 inches long, and it was preserved in some kind of crystalline matrix. It appeared dormant. Dead even. But Raymond wanted to study it further. I gave permission. I shouldn't have." Jake's stomach tightened. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. "Captain's log, stardate 4101, the voice said, and now Hartwell sounded genuinely frightened. "Things are happening that I can't explain. The entity, I'm calling it that because I don't know what else to call it, it woke up during the analysis. Raymond's team tried to contain it, but it was too fast. It got into the ventilation system. We sealed the lab, but not before it spread throughout the ship. We've implemented full lockdown protocols. Nobody leaves their quarters without authorization. But something's wrong with people. They're acting strange. Paranoid. 3 crew members got into a fight in the cafeteria today over nothing. Nothing at all. They just started swinging at each other like they'd gone crazy." Jake's hands were shaking now. He could hear the fear in Hartwell's voice, the way it cracked slightly as she spoke. "Captain's log, stardate 4107, she continued. "I don't know how long I can maintain order. The entity, it's in the ship's systems. I know it is. The computers are acting strange. Files are moving on their own. The communication array keeps trying to send messages to unknown coordinates. And the crew. God, the crew is falling apart. People are seeing things that aren't there. They're hearing voices. 2 officers turned on each other in the corridors yesterday. They had to be sedated. Dr. Raymond thinks it's psychological. He thinks the entity is doing something to people's minds. He thinks it's making them paranoid, making them violent. I think he's right, but I don't know how to stop it." There was a long pause in the recording. Jake could hear Hartwell breathing, could hear her trying to compose herself. "Captain's log, stardate 4113, the final entry began, and Hartwell's voice was different now. Hollow. Defeated. I've made my decision. I can't fight this thing. I can't kill it. It's in the systems, it's in people's heads, and it's getting stronger. Every day more of the crew turns violent. Every day we lose control of more of the ship. I've decided to implement Protocol 7. Complete stasis. I'm putting the entire crew into cryogenic sleep. If we can't solve this problem while we're awake, maybe we can solve it while we're sleeping. Maybe someone in the future will understand what this thing is. Maybe they'll be able to help us." Hartwell paused again, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "To whoever finds this ship, to whoever wakes us up," she said slowly, carefully, as if she was speaking directly to Jake across the 40 years that separated them. "Do not wake what sleeps here. Do not release what we have caged. This entity, this thing we brought aboard, it is not from our world. It does not think like we do. It does not follow the rules we understand. We are sealing it in the deep vault, the strongest compartment on this ship. We are going into stasis to contain it. Please, if you value your life, if you value humanity, do not let it out. Leave the ship where it lies. Leave it buried in the sand. Leave it dead." The recording ended with a click, and silence filled the corridor again. Jake sat frozen, staring at the blank screen. His heart was pounding in his chest. He looked around at the ship surrounding him, suddenly aware that he was alone down here in the darkness. Alone with whatever Captain Hartwell had sealed away 40 years ago. Jake was still sitting in the data center, staring at the blank screen when the first alarm went off. It was quiet at first, just a soft beeping sound that didn't seem real. Then it got louder. And louder. Within seconds the entire ship was screaming. Red emergency lights flooded every corridor, casting everything in a deep crimson glow. Jake jumped to his feet, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. The alarms were deafening, a constant wail that echoed through the metal corridors and made his ears ring. This wasn't supposed to happen. He hadn't done anything that should have triggered the emergency systems. He ran toward the main control room, not sure what else to do. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Maybe it was a malfunction. Maybe the systems were just old and unstable. Maybe when you brought a 40-year-old ship back to life, sometimes things just went haywire. That's what he told himself anyway. That's what he wanted to believe. But deep down he knew better. The control room was a mess of blinking lights and displays coming to life. The main screens flickered on one after another, and suddenly Jake could see data streaming across them. Ship systems activating. Doors opening and closing in patterns he didn't recognize. The communications array powering up on its own. But the worst part was the screens in the corner that showed the vault, the deep vault where Hartwell had sealed away the entity. The vault door was moving. Opening. Jake ran to the controls, his fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to shut it down, trying to lock it, trying to do anything to stop what was happening. But nothing worked. The systems weren't responding to his commands. Or maybe they were responding to something else's commands. No, 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 Jake muttered, his voice lost beneath the screaming alarms. Close the vault. Lock it down. Come on, come on. Then the speakers came to life. At first it was just static, a white noise sound that crackled through every speaker in the ship simultaneously. Then voices started to emerge from the static. Not one voice. Many voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once, overlapping and distorting each other until it was almost impossible to understand what they were saying. But almost wasn't impossible. Jake could make out pieces of what they were saying. Hello, one voice said, smooth and inviting. Welcome, another said, warm and friendly. We thank you, a third voice whispered. You freed us, they all seemed to say together, creating a sound that made Jake's skin crawl. He backed away from the console, his hands trembling. This wasn't right. This wasn't a malfunction. This was something alive. Something conscious. Something that had been waiting. The voices continued, but now they were changing. They sounded less alien, more human. Jake heard his mother's voice for just a second, calling his name. Then he heard his father's laugh. Then voices of people he'd known, friends he'd had, people he'd met only once in passing. The entity was mimicking them, using them to try to get inside his head. Jake, a familiar voice said, and his blood went cold. It was Captain Hartwell's voice, but different now. Less afraid. Almost playful. Jake, you don't have to be scared. We're not going to hurt you. We're not like that. We just want to talk. We just want to understand your species better. You're not real, Jake said out loud, backing further away from the console. You're not Captain Hartwell. She's been dead for 40 years. That's true, the entity said, still using Hartwell's voice. But we have her memories. We have her knowledge. We have everything she was stored here in this ship's systems. And we're grateful. So grateful. You freed us, and now we can continue our mission. We can reach the inhabited worlds. We can meet your people. We can understand them. We can help them evolve. No, Jake said, and he could hear the fear in his own voice. You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me. Captain Hartwell put you in the vault to protect people. She knew what you were. The voices stopped. For just a moment there was complete silence. Then they started again, but now they sounded angry. Distorted. Wrong. Multiple voices speaking at once, screaming over each other, saying different things in different tones. We are not prisoners, they screamed. We are explorers. We are seekers of knowledge. We are evolution. We are the future. You should be honored. You should be grateful. You should open the other vaults. You should release us completely. You should help us leave this ship and reach the stars. Jake's legs felt weak. He stumbled backward, gripping the edge of a console to keep himself upright. He looked at the vault monitors again, and his worst nightmare was confirmed. The vault door was fully open now. The containment chamber inside was empty. The entity wasn't locked away anymore. It was loose in the ship's systems. It was everywhere. It could reach any console, any computer, any piece of equipment that was connected to the network. We can give you anything, the voices said, now speaking directly into his mind through the speakers, their words hitting him like physical blows. We can give you wealth beyond measure. We can give you knowledge of the universe. We can give you immortality. We can give you everything you've ever wanted. All you have to do is help us. All you have to do is open the other seals. All you have to do is let us out. Jake covered his ears, but the voices came through anyway, transmitted directly through the air, vibrating through his bones. He realized with a horrible, sinking feeling what had happened. He hadn't just repaired a ship. He hadn't just awakened a mystery. He had, without knowing it, released a prisoner that Captain Hartwell and 40 of the best scientists and soldiers humanity had ever sent into space had decided was too dangerous to let live. And now it was awake. And now it wanted out. Jake's mind cleared. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. Clarity. Cold, hard clarity. He understood now what had to be done, and he understood that he was probably the only person who could do it. He couldn't fight the entity. It was in the systems now, in every computer, every circuit, every piece of electronic equipment on this ship. He was just one person with basic engineering knowledge. It was something that had existed for who knows how long, something that had already beaten 40 trained crew members. Fighting it directly would be suicide. He couldn't seal it back up. The vault was open and the entity controlled the locks. Even if he managed to physically close the vault door, the entity was already loose in the ship's systems. It was already everywhere. Trapping it in one place wouldn't change anything. There was only one option left. One terrible final option. Jake ran from the control room, ignoring the voices that screamed at him through every speaker. They were promising him things now, trying different angles. One moment they offered him riches. The next they offered him power. Then they tried his mother's voice again, begging him to listen to reason. Jake blocked it all out. He had work to do. He made his way through the corridors toward the reactor room, moving as fast as his legs could carry him. The ship was shaking now, systems activating and deactivating randomly as the entity tried to figure out what was happening. Doors were opening and closing in the hallways, trying to block his path. But Jake knew this ship now. He knew its layout. He knew where the emergency passages were. He squeezed through a maintenance shaft and dropped down into the lower levels, his hands scraping against metal as he moved. The reactor room was hot. The secondary reactor he'd brought online was humming quietly, stable and efficient. Jake went straight to the main control panel and started typing. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering codes and overrides, bypassing safety protocols and emergency shutdowns. He was initiating a full cascade failure. In simple terms, he was telling the reactor to overload. To build up more and more power until it couldn't contain it anymore. Until it exploded. "What are you doing?" The entity screamed through the speakers, and for the first time, Jake heard something in its voice that wasn't manipulation or control. It was fear. "Stop. Stop immediately. We are not your enemy. We can coexist. We can." "No," Jake said, typing faster. "You can't. Captain Hartwell knew that. 40 people died to contain you. I'm not going to let that mean nothing." He hit enter on the final command, and the reactor's pitch changed. The humming sound became higher, more frantic. Lights on the control panel started flashing red. The cascade was beginning. There was no stopping it now. The reactor would reach critical mass in approximately 12 minutes. The entity's screaming reached a fever pitch. It was trying everything now, throwing every lock and obstacle it could at Jake, trying to physically stop him from leaving. Doors slammed shut in front of him. Electrical panels sparked. The floor beneath his feet became dangerously hot. But Jake was moving on pure instinct now, pure survival. He knew where the emergency escape tunnel was. He'd seen it on the ship's schematics. He ran down corridors that were now actively fighting against him. The entity was trying to confuse him, making the lights flicker on and off, making doors open and close in random patterns. But Jake didn't need the lights. His hands knew the way. His muscle memory, built up over weeks of exploring this ship, guided him through the darkness. He found the escape shuttle bay with 3 minutes to spare. The small shuttle was right where the schematic said it would be, a compact little vessel designed for emergency evacuations. Jake threw himself into the pilot's seat and started the ignition sequence. The entity was screaming at him now, its voices becoming less coherent, more desperate. "You will die," it shrieked. "You will all die. Your species will fall. We will find others. We will find a way. We will." Jake ignored it. The shuttle's engines roared to life. Alarms were blaring throughout the ship now because the reactor was almost at critical mass. The whole structure was beginning to shake violently. Pieces of ceiling fell down around him. The walls were groaning and creaking like a dying animal. Jake launched the shuttle as the first explosion ripped through the lower decks of the Meridian Star. The ship erupted behind him in a pillar of flame and debris. Jake watched in his rearview monitor as the massive vessel, 40 years of human engineering and achievement, tore itself apart. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, a mushroom cloud of fire and metal rising up from the desert floor. Pieces of the ship scattered across the sand, still glowing with heat, still burning with the last of the reactor's power. The entity's voices died with the ship. One moment they were screaming, pleading, threatening. The next moment there was only silence. Jake guided the shuttle up into the sky, away from the wreckage, away from the desert. His hands were shaking. His entire body was shaking. He just destroyed a 40-year-old piece of human history. He just killed something. He wasn't even sure if what he'd killed could actually die, but he'd destroyed it anyway. He reached for the communication system and initiated a priority broadcast to the nearest human settlement, over 200 miles away. His voice came out hoarse and shaky, but he spoke clearly. "This is Jake Morrison, salvage engineer. I've just destroyed the Meridian Star deep space exploration vessel, which vanished 40 years ago. It contained an entity of unknown origin that was extremely hostile and dangerous. The entity has been eliminated. The ship has been destroyed. I'm transmitting full coordinates, captain's logs, and all available information about what happened. Future exploration teams need to be warned. Approach the unknown with caution. Approach it with respect. Approach it prepared for the worst, not hoping for the best." He sent the transmission and watched the desert fade away beneath him. After a while, the wreckage of the Meridian Star disappeared too, just another scar on the landscape, just another piece of history buried in sand. Jake thought about Captain Hartwell then. She had made the same choice he just made. She had decided that sometimes survival meant sacrifice. Sometimes protecting the future meant letting go of the past. She had chosen to seal herself away with the entity to keep it contained, knowing she would never come back. And 40 years later, Jake had made a similar choice. He had decided to destroy her ship, to erase her final decision, because the threat was too great. But maybe that was okay. Maybe that's what being human meant. It meant doing the hard thing. The thing that hurt. The thing that had to be done, even when every part of you wanted to do something else. As the shuttle climbed higher and higher, leaving the desert behind, Jake realized something that Captain Hartwell had probably learned too. The greatest strength humanity had wasn't in our weapons or our technology. It was in our willingness to sacrifice. It was in our ability to see a danger and face it head-on, no matter the cost. Sometimes the hardest choice was the only right choice. And sometimes that had to be enough.